The morning sun glinted off the sleek curves of the custom arch motorcycle parked outside Joe's Diner, a small roadside establishment tucked along the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. It wasn't just any motorcycle. This was a masterpiece of engineering and design, a KRGT1 model with a matte black finish and subtle customizations that only true enthusiasts would notice. The bike stood out among the more common Harleys and sports bikes in the lot, like a Black Panther among house cats. Inside the diner, the motorcycle's owner sat alone in a corner booth, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, beard slightly unkempt. Few patrons noticed the man quietly sipping his coffee and reading a dog-eared paperback. Those who did simply saw a tall, lean guy in his 50s dressed in worn jeans, boots, and a simple black jacket, not the Hollywood star who had thrilled millions in action films. That was exactly how Keanu Reeves preferred it. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair tied back in a loose bun, approached his table. "Need a refill, hun?" she asked, coffee pot already tilted toward his cup. Unlike some of the younger staff, she had no idea who he was, which was precisely why Keanu frequented this place. "That would be great, thanks," he replied with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His voice was soft, almost hidden beneath the clatter of plates and morning chatter filling the diner. As she poured, the waitress glanced out the window. "That your bike out there? The black one?" Keanu nodded, his eyes lighting up ever so slightly. If there was one thing that could get him talking, it was motorcycles. "My late husband rode for 40 years, she said, a touch of nostalgia in her voice. "Never saw anything quite like that one, though." "It's an arch," Keanu explained, setting his book down. "My friend Gard and I started the company about 10 years ago." The waitress raised her eyebrows, impressed but not connecting the dots. "You build motorcycles?" "That's something." Keanu didn't correct her assumption that he was just some guy who worked at a motorcycle company. In many ways, that felt more authentic to him than being recognized as the star of blockbuster films. His passion for motorcycles wasn't a celebrity, hobby, or a side gig. It was a genuine love affair that had started back in his 20s when he bought his first bike. A young couple at a nearby table kept stealing glances his way, whispering to each other. Keanu pretended not to notice, taking another sip of his coffee. This was the dance he'd perfected over decades of fame, acknowledging the recognition without encouraging it. He returned to his book, a collection of poetry by Leonard Cohen, finding refuge in the words. Outside, a group of teenagers stopped to admire the motorcycle, pointing at various features and taking photos. They didn't touch it. There was something about the bike that commanded respect. One boy, no more than 16, pressed his nose against the diner window, scanning the customers inside, wondering who could possibly own such a machine. The motorcycle wasn't just transportation. It was an extension of Keanu himself. Each curve and component had been thoughtfully designed, with hundreds of hours poured into its creation. The KRGT1 was Arch Motorcycle Company's first production model, named after its founders, Keanu Reeves and Gard Hollinger. What had started as Keanu commissioning Gard to build him a custom bike had evolved into a friendship, a business partnership, and eventually a small but prestigious motorcycle manufacturer. Keanu checked his watch. He had a few hours before he needed to be back in Los Angeles for a meeting about his next film project. These morning rides up the coast were his form of meditation, a chance to feel the wind, hear the engines rumble, and clear his mind of the chaos that came with his public life. The cook called out an order from the kitchen, momentarily drowning out the soft rock playing on the diner's old jukebox. A group of businessmen in the booth behind Keanu were discussing some real estate deal, their voices rising with excitement over potential profits. Keanu tuned them out, focusing instead on the way the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long rectangles of warmth across the checkered floor. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Normally, he'd ignore it during his breakfast ritual, but he was expecting a call from his sister. He pulled it out, disappointed to see it was just his agent with another offer for a voiceover gig. That could wait. He silenced the phone and tucked it away. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, approached his table clutching a napkin. His mother hovered anxiously a few steps behind. "Excuse me," the boy said, his voice barely audible. "Are you the guy from those movies?" Keanu set his book down and gave the child his full attention. "I am an actor, yes," he replied kindly. "My dad says you know kung fu and stuff. The boy continued, gaining confidence. Keanu chuckled. I've learned some moves for films, but I'm not really a martial artist. The boy thrust forward the napkin and a pen. Could you sign this? My dad would flip out. Without hesitation, Keanu took the items and asked, What's your name? Charlie? The boy replied, bouncing slightly on his toes. Keanu wrote a short, kind message and handed it back. The boy's mother mouthed a thank you, gently guiding her son back to their table where an older man, presumably Charlie's father, looked over with a mix of embarrassment and excitement. These interactions were part of Keanu's life now. He'd long ago accepted them with grace, understanding that his work meant something to people. What he couldn't get used to was the idea that people thought they knew him based on the characters he played. The real Keanu, the motorcycle enthusiast, the bass player, the poetry reader, remained largely private. Finishing his breakfast, Keanu left a generous tip under his coffee cup. The waitress had treated him like any other customer, and that was worth more than the extra $20 he placed on the table. He nodded goodbye to her as he headed for the door. The morning had warmed considerably since his arrival, and Keanu removed his jacket, draping it over his arm as he walked toward his motorcycle. A group of tourists taking selfies by the diner's vintage sign turned to watch him approach the arch. He could see the moment of recognition cross their faces, the double takes and widened eyes. One woman nudged her friend and pointed, not quite subtly. Keanu ran his hand along the bike's fuel tank, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips. Each ride was special to him, a small freedom in a life that was often dictated by shooting schedules and press junkets. On the road, with the engine rumbling beneath him, he wasn't Keanu Reeves' movie star, he was just another rider. As he mounted the bike, he noticed a weathered pickup truck pulling into the lot, dust coating its sides and a gun rack visible in the rear window. 3 men emerged, each wearing leather vests with patches Keanu didn't recognize. They moved with the swagger of men who commanded respect in their circles, scanning the parking lot as if assessing territory. Keanu inserted his key into the ignition but didn't start the engine immediately. Something about the men's demeanor made him pause. They weren't looking at him, they hadn't noticed him yet, but their attention was fixed on his motorcycle. The largest of the 3, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, pointed at the bike and said something to his companions that made them laugh. A small knot formed in Keanu's stomach. He'd encountered his share of motorcycle enthusiasts over the years, and most were respectful, even reverent when they recognized an arch. These men were different. There was an edge to them, a hardness that spoke of long roads and harder lives. Keanu considered his options. He could start the bike and leave now, avoiding whatever interaction might be brewing. Or he could stay, perhaps introduce himself, share his passion for motorcycles with fellow riders. Before he could decide, the diner door swung open again, and a young waitress, not the older woman who had served him, stepped out for a smoke break. Her eyes darted between Keanu and the newcomers, a flicker of concern crossing her face. The 3 men turned at the sound of the door, their attention momentarily diverted from the motorcycle. Their eyes found Keanu, still sitting astride the arch, keys in hand. For a moment no one moved. Then the bearded man's eyes narrowed, not with recognition but with something closer to territorial assessment. Keanu nodded politely, the way one rider acknowledges another. The man didn't return the gesture. Instead, he muttered something to his friends and started walking toward the entrance of the diner, deliberately passing close to where Keanu sat on his motorcycle. As they passed, one of the men, younger than the others, with a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck, ran a finger along the handlebar of the arch. "Nice bike," he said, but there was no admiration in his voice, only challenge. Keanu felt the weight of the moment, the subtle shift in the morning's peaceful energy. He had no way of knowing that this brief encounter would set in motion events that would end with his beloved motorcycle in pieces, or that the aftermath would reveal more about these men and himself than anyone could have anticipated. The 3 men entered Joe's diner like they owned the place, leather vests creaking as they squeezed into a booth near the back. The largest man, who everyone called Bear, slapped his palm on the table to get the waitress's attention. The whole diner seemed to grow quieter, conversations fading as other patrons sensed the shift in atmosphere. "3 coffees, darlin', and whatever's hot on the grill," Bear called out, not bothering to look at a menu, His companions, a lanky guy with a scraggly blonde beard known as Skinner and the younger bald man covered in tattoos whom they called Ink, scanned the diner with cold eyes. Outside, Keanu decided against leaving immediately. Something told him that walking away now might be interpreted as weakness. Instead, he dismounted his bike, pocketed the keys, and headed back into the diner. He chose a different seat at the counter, one that gave him a clear view of both the entrance and the biker's table. The older waitress approached him with a puzzled look. "Forget something, hun. Just decided I could use another coffee," Keanu replied with a small smile. He positioned himself so he could keep an eye on his motorcycle through the window. At their table, the three bikers were now looking at their phones, passing one back and forth between them. Ink, the youngest, kept glancing over at Keanu, recognition slowly dawning on his face. "Hey," he whispered to his companions. "I think that's the dude from those action movies. The one with the guns and stuff." Bear barely looked up. "Don't care if he's the King of England. Did you see that fancy bike he's riding?" Skinner peered out the window at the Arch motorcycle. "That's one of them boutique bikes. Probably costs more than we make in a year." "Rich boy toys," Bear muttered, his voice thick with disdain. "Bet he's never even gotten it dirty. Probably trailered it here for his morning latte." The waitress arrived with their coffees, placing them carefully on the table. Bear reached out and caught her wrist, not roughly but firmly enough to make her stop. "That spot out front." He nodded toward the window where Keanu's motorcycle was parked. "That used to be bike parking for the wolf pack." The waitress gently pulled her arm free. "Don't know anything about that. Before my time. Been coming to this diner for 15 years, Bear continued as if she hadn't spoken. "That spot's always been for real riders, not Hollywood types with their fancy toys." At the counter, Keanu couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see the waitress's discomfort. He considered intervening but didn't want to escalate the situation. Sometimes the best response was no response at all. The bikers' food arrived and they fell silent as they ate, occasionally glancing out the window at the Arch motorcycle gleaming in the California sun. The tension in the diner began to dissipate as other customers paid their bills and left, casting curious glances at both Keanu and the intimidating bikers. Keanu's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Guard Hollinger, his business partner at Arch Motorcycle. Meeting with the engineers pushed to 3 p.m. New prototype parts came in. "You should see these," Keanu texted back a quick acknowledgement. He'd need to leave soon to make it back to the city in time. He paid his second bill, leaving another generous tip, and headed for the door. As he passed the biker's table, he felt their eyes tracking him. Outside, he approached his motorcycle, aware that the men were watching through the window. He took his time putting on his jacket and gloves, then his helmet. There was nothing to be gained from rushing. Inside the diner, Bear drained the last of his coffee and slammed the cup down. "Rich folk think they can just roll in here and take over everything." Skinner nodded in agreement. "Remember when this whole stretch was just working people? Now it's all movie stars and tech millionaires. My old man used to ride with the original wolf pack," Ink said, eyes still fixed on Keanu as he prepared to leave. "They basically owned this part of the coast. Had respect." Bear pulled out his wallet and tossed some bills on the table. "World's changed, kid. Now it's all about who's got the most expensive toys." They watched as Keanu started his motorcycle, the powerful engine rumbling to life. The sound seemed to irritate Bear further. He clenched his jaw as Keanu pulled out of the parking spot and headed back toward the highway. "Let's follow him," Bear suddenly decided. "See where Mr. Hollywood goes with his pretty bike." The other two exchanged glances but didn't argue. Minutes later, they were on their own motorcycles, well-used Harley-Davidsons that had seen thousands of miles. Following at a distance as Keanu rode south, along the Pacific Coast Highway, Keanu noticed them in his mirrors but didn't change his pace. He wasn't speeding, just enjoying the coastal road as he always did. Maybe they were simply headed in the same direction. After about 10 miles, he pulled into a small scenic overlook, a paved area where tourists often stopped to take photos of the ocean. He needed to make a call about the afternoon meeting, and this seemed like a good place to stop. The three bikers cruised past, then doubled back, pulling into the overlook and parking near the entrance. They remained on their bikes, engines idling. Keanu removed his helmet and took out his phone, trying to ignore their presence as he called guard. But he could feel the tension building. This wasn't a chance encounter anymore. After a brief conversation about the meeting, he ended the call. The three bikers had finally shut off their engines and were now walking toward him. Keanu stood his ground, one hand still resting on his motorcycle. "Nice day for a ride," he offered neutrally as they approached. Bear ignored the pleasantry. "That's quite a machine you got there." "Custom built?" "Yes," Keanu replied simply. "It's an Arch KRGT1. "Arch?" Inc. repeated. "Never heard of it." "It's a small company," Keanu explained, his voice calm. "We only make about 100 bikes a year." "We?" Skinner picked up on the word. "I co-founded the company with a master builder named Gard Hollinger." Bear circled the motorcycle slowly, examining it from every angle. "So you're telling me you build these things? You're not just some actor playing dress-up as a biker." The question was clearly meant to provoke, but Keanu refused to take the bait. "I don't build them personally. We have a team of skilled engineers and craftsmen. I'm involved in the design and testing." "How much?" Bear asked bluntly, stopping his circling to face Keanu. "They start around 80,000. Bear let out a low whistle. 80 grand for a motorcycle? Must be nice. "It's a premium product," Keanu replied evenly. "Years of development, quality materials, limited production. You hear that, boys?" Bear turned to his friends with a mocking smile. "It's a premium product, not like our junky old Harleys." Keanu realized the conversation was going nowhere good. He reached for his helmet. "I should get going. Have a meeting back in LA." "Of course you do." Bear stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Keanu. "Important Hollywood business, right? Making more millions while regular folks can barely fill their tanks?" Keanu met his gaze steadily. "I understand you might have some issues with me, but I'm just trying to enjoy my ride like anyone else." "Like anyone else?" Skinner joined in. "Regular folks don't drop 80 grand on a motorcycle. Or take up parking spots that belong to real riding clubs," added Inc., gaining courage from his friend's confrontation. Keanu looked between the three men, recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond a simple disagreement about motorcycles. This wasn't about him personally or even about his bike. He represented something to these men, something they resented. "Look," Keanu said, "I respect that you guys have history in that area. I didn't know about any unofficial reserved spots. I was just having breakfast." "Save your respect," Bear growled. "That spot at Joe's has been Wolfpack territory for decades. My father used to park his bike there. His father before him." Keanu nodded slowly, trying to find some common ground. "I get tradition. I understand heritage. Motorcycles have been a big part of my life for a long time, too." "It's not the same," Bear insisted, his anger seemingly fueled by Keanu's calm responses. "You play at this. For us, it's life." A car pulled into the overlook, a family of tourists emerging with cameras. They spotted Keanu immediately, excited whispers passing between them. The bikers noticed the recognition on the tourists' faces and something shifted in their demeanor. Bear took a step back, his expression hardening. "Looks like your fans are here. Don't let us regular folks keep you from your adoring public." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode back to his motorcycle, his companions following. They fired up their engines with deliberate revs that echoed off the cliff face, drowning out the sound of the ocean below. As they pulled away, Bear locked eyes with Keanu one last time. The look contained a clear message. This isn't over. Keanu watched them disappear around a bend in the highway, a sense of unease settling over him. What had started as a peaceful morning ride had turned into something else entirely. He couldn't shake the feeling that he would see those three men again, and soon. Little did he know that his beloved Arch motorcycle would become the focus of their misplaced anger, or that their next encounter would end very differently than this one. 2 days later, Keanu returned to Joe's diner. He hadn't planned to come back so soon, but the encounter with the bikers had left him troubled. There was something about their anger that felt deeper than a simple parking dispute. Besides, he refused to let confrontation change his habits or limit his freedom to ride where he pleased. The morning was overcast, unusual for this stretch of coastline. Fog clung to the cliffs and the ocean was a steel gray that matched the sky. Keanu pulled into the parking lot, noticing immediately that it was emptier than usual. The spot where he'd parked before was vacant, as if waiting for him. He hesitated briefly before steering his Arch motorcycle into it. Inside, the diner was quiet. A few regulars hunched over coffee cups at the counter, and an elderly couple shared toast in a corner booth. The older waitress brightened when she saw Keanu. "Back so soon?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Something about this place," Keanu replied with a small smile. "Hard to stay away." She poured his coffee and leaned in slightly. "Those fellows who were in here the other day, they were asking about you after you left." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What did they want to know?" "If you came here often." "What you usually ordered." She shrugged. "I didn't tell them much. Got a bad feeling about them, especially the big one." "Bear," Keanu said, remembering what the others had called him. The waitress nodded. "That's what they called him. Used to be part of a motorcycle club that hung around here years ago. The Wolf Pack, they called themselves. Bunch of troublemakers, if you ask me. Most of them moved on when this area got more expensive." Keanu took a sip of his coffee, considering this information. "Thanks for the heads up. Just be careful," she said before moving on to her other customers. Keanu ate his breakfast slowly, glancing occasionally at his motorcycle through the window. The encounter at the scenic overlook had been tense, but he hadn't felt truly threatened. Still, there was an intensity to Bear's anger that went beyond a simple territorial dispute. His phone rang. Guard Hollinger, his business partner. "Hey," Keanu answered. "How'd the tests go with the new prototype?" "That's why I'm calling," Guard replied, excitement evident in his voice. "The handling improvements are incredible. You need to get down here and try it yourself." "I'll head to the shop now," Keanu said, already calculating the fastest route from Malibu to their facility. "Should be there in about an hour, depending on traffic." He finished his coffee, left his usual generous tip, and headed outside. The fog had begun to lift, revealing patches of blue sky. It would be a good ride back to the city. He was looking forward to testing the new prototype. Every Arch motorcycle was a passion project, a constant evolution of design and performance. As Keanu approached his bike, he noticed something wasn't right. The motorcycle was leaning at an odd angle. Getting closer, he saw that both tires had been slashed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He circled the bike slowly, discovering more damage with each step. Deep scratches in the paint, broken mirrors, severed brake lines. This wasn't random vandalism. This was deliberate, targeted destruction. A few miles down the coast, at a rundown motel with a view of the ocean, Bear sat on the edge of a sagging bed, cleaning grease from under his fingernails with a pocket knife. Skinner lounged in a chair by the window while Ink paced the small room, energy radiating off him in waves. "You should have seen it," Ink was saying, his voice pitched high with excitement. "Perfect clean cuts. That bike isn't going anywhere." "Keep your voice down," Bear growled. "Walls are thin in this dump." "No one's listening." Ink dismissed the concern. "Anyway, you should have been there." "It was beautiful work." Bear snapped his knife shut. "I told you to mess with his ride, not destroy it." "That's an $80,000 motorcycle, so?" Skinner looked up from his phone. "Rich boy can buy another one. Probably has 10 more at home." Bear shook his head. "It's not about the money. It's about respect. About sending a message that some things still belong to the old guard." "Message sent." Ink flopped onto the second bed. "Loud and clear." "You don't get it," Bear stood up, suddenly agitated. "This isn't just some random rich guy." "Skinner, show him." Skinner handed his phone to Ink. On the screen was an article about Arch Motorcycle Company, with photos of Keanu Reeves and Guard Hollinger standing beside their creations. "Holy shit," Ink's face drained of color. "That's really him?" "The actor guy?" "Co-founder of Arch Motorcycle," Bear confirmed. "Not just some Hollywood type who bought a fancy toy. He actually helped create the company that builds those bikes." Ink handed the phone back, his earlier bravado evaporating. "I didn't know." "That's why I said mess with it, not destroy it," Bear rubbed his temples. "There's a line between sending a message and asking for serious trouble." Back at Joe's diner, Keanu was on the phone with a tow service, arranging to have his damaged motorcycle picked up. The older waitress had come outside when she saw him examining the bike, and now stood nearby, her face a mask of concern. Who would do such a thing? She asked, though they both knew the answer. Keanu didn't respond directly. "Do you know where they might be staying? Bear and his friends?" She hesitated. "There's a motel down the highway. The Sea Breeze. It's the only place around here cheap enough for their type." She immediately looked embarrassed by her words. "I shouldn't assume." "It's okay," Keanu assured her. "Thanks for the information." After arranging for the tow, Keanu called a rideshare to take him to the Sea Breeze motel. He wasn't looking for confrontation, but he wanted answers. The damage to his motorcycle wasn't just about money, though the repairs would be substantial. It was the principle, the deliberate targeting of something he cared about. The Seabreeze Motel had seen better days. Paint peeled from the doors and the neon sign had several letters burned out. 3 Harley-Davidsons were parked outside one of the ground floor rooms. Keanu paid the driver and stepped out, taking a moment to center himself before approaching the door. He knocked firmly. Silence followed, then muffled voices. Finally, the door opened a crack and Ink's tattooed face appeared. His eyes widened in recognition. Guys?" He called over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off Keanu. "We've got company." The door opened wider to reveal Bear and Skinner. Bear's expression showed no surprise, as if he'd been expecting this visit. "Mr. Hollywood," he said flatly, "what brings you to our humble accommodations?" "I think you know," Keanu replied, his voice level. "My motorcycle was vandalized this morning." "That's a shame," Bear said, though there was no sympathy in his tone. "World's full of disrespectful people these days." Keanu met his gaze directly. "I'm not here to make accusations. I just want to understand why." Bear considered him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You might as well come in." The motel room was cramped and smelled of cigarettes and cheap beer. Fast food wrappers littered a small table and duffel bags were piled in one corner. Keanu remained standing near the door as Bear sat heavily on one of the beds. "Why do you think we had anything to do with your bike?" Bear asked. "Let's not waste time," Keanu said. "We both know what happened. I'm not here for revenge or to call the police. I just want to know why it was so important to destroy something that meant a lot to me." Ink, who had been fidgeting nervously, suddenly burst out, "We didn't know who you were." "I mean, we knew you were some actor, but we didn't know about the motorcycle company until after." "Shut up," Bear cut him off. "But the damage was done." Keanu nodded slowly. "So it was you, but you're saying you wouldn't have done it if you'd known I helped create Arch Motorcycle." "It's complicated," Bear said, a defensive edge in his voice. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Keanu replied simply. Bear stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. "My father was the president of the Wolf Pack for 20 years. That stretch of coast was our territory. That spot at Joe's was where he always parked his bike." He turned to face Keanu again. "Then people like you started moving in. Rich folks who wanted ocean views. Celebrities building mansions. Property values went up, and suddenly the locals, the people who'd lived and worked here for generations, couldn't afford to stay." "I'm sorry about that," Keanu said, and he meant it. "But how does damaging my motorcycle change any of that?" "It doesn't," Bear admitted. "But seeing you there, with your perfect life and your perfect bike, parked in my father's spot." He trailed off, the anger that had fueled his actions now fading into something that looked more like shame. "For what it's worth," Keanu said after a moment, "I understand feeling like the world is changing too fast, leaving behind the things and people you care about. But this?" He gestured vaguely, indicating the vandalism. "This doesn't solve anything." Skinner, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "So what happens now?" "You calling the cops?" Keanu considered the question seriously. He had every right to report the vandalism. The damage would cost thousands to repair, and these men had acted out of misplaced anger and resentment. But looking at them now, Bear with his fading bravado, Ink nervously picking at his tattoos, Skinner trying to appear tough despite the fear in his eyes, Keanu saw something he recognized. People struggling to find their place in a world that kept changing around them. "No," he finally said. "I'm not calling the police." The 3 bikers exchanged confused glances. "Why not?" Bear asked suspiciously. Keanu moved toward the door. "Because it wouldn't fix my motorcycle, and it wouldn't fix whatever's really broken here." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "But I do have a better idea." The 3 bikers stared at Keanu, waiting for him to explain what he meant by a better idea. "I've got a shop in Los Angeles," Keanu said. "The Arch Motorcycle headquarters. Why don't you come see what we do there? Maybe then you'll understand why that bike meant something to me beyond just its price tag." Bear crossed his arms. "And why would we do that?" "Because you owe me," Keanu replied simply. "Not money, but a willingness to see things differently. That's all I'm asking for." The 3 men exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. "Could be a trap," Skinner muttered. "Get us in the city, then call the cops." Keanu shook his head. "I give you my word, no police." This stays between us. Your word? Bear scoffed. What's that worth? More than you might think, Keanu said quietly. A heavy silence filled the motel room. Outside, a car door slammed and voices drifted past the window. Finally, Bear nodded. Fine, we'll come see your fancy shop. But we ride our own bikes. We don't follow you directly. That's fair, Keanu agreed. I'll text you the address. He held out his hand for someone's phone. After a moment's hesitation, Ink handed over his device. Keanu entered the address and his personal number, then returned the phone. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, he said, turning toward the door. And just so we're clear, this doesn't make what you did okay. But maybe it can be the start of something better. With that, he left, the door closing behind him. Are we really doing this? Ink asked after Keanu was gone. Bear sank onto the bed. You got a better idea? We trashed an $80,000 motorcycle belonging to a movie star who could press charges and ruin our lives. If he's offering a way out that doesn't involve jail time, I'm taking it. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Keanu arrived at the Arch motorcycle facility early, wanting time to prepare his team for the unusual visitors. The building was unassuming from the outside, a renovated industrial space in a quiet area of Los Angeles, but inside was a state-of-the-art motorcycle design and production facility. Guard Hollinger, Keanu's business partner, was skeptical about the plan. Let me get this straight, he said, leaning against a workbench. These guys destroyed one of our bikes, and instead of pressing charges, you're giving them a private tour. I know it sounds crazy, Keanu admitted, but there's something deeper going on here. They're angry about more than just a parking spot. Guard shook his head. Your capacity for forgiveness never ceases to amaze me. Just keep them away from anything sharp or valuable. At precisely 10 o'clock, the rumble of approaching motorcycles announced the arrival of Bear, Skinner, and Ink. They parked in the lot outside, removing their helmets but leaving their leather jackets on despite the growing heat of the day. Keanu met them at the entrance. You came, said we would, Bear replied gruffly, though his eyes were already moving past Keanu to take in the facility behind him. Welcome to Arch Motorcycle, Keanu stepped aside to let them enter. The main space was a combination of workshop and showroom. Several completed motorcycles gleamed under carefully positioned lights, while others in various stages of assembly stood in the production area. Engineers and mechanics worked at different stations, some looking up curiously as the unusual group walked in. This is where we design and build every Arch motorcycle, Keanu explained, leading them through the space. We're a small operation, only produce about 100 bikes a year. 100 bikes at 80 grand each, Skinner calculated. That's good money. It's not about the money, Keanu said. It's about creating something that matters, something built with passion and purpose. Bear ran his hand along the frame of a partially completed motorcycle. Pretty words. But at the end of the day, you're selling luxury toys to rich people. Maybe, Keanu conceded. But we're also preserving something important. Craftsmanship, attention to detail, the relationship between rider and machine. He gestured toward the workshop area. Come see how we build them. For the next hour, Keanu guided them through the production process. He introduced them to the team, showed them how each part was crafted, explained the engineering behind the design decisions. Despite their initial resistance, the three bikers found themselves drawn into the world of high-end motorcycle creation. Ink, in particular, couldn't hide his fascination with the machining process. He watched wide-eyed, as a technician programmed a CNC machine to cut a complex aluminum part. You do this for every bike? He asked. Every single one, the technician confirmed. No mass production here. Bear remained more reserved, but even he couldn't maintain his indifference when they reached the engine assembly area. He asked detailed questions about the performance specifications, nodding appreciatively at the answers. Eventually, they made their way to a separate room where Keanu's damaged motorcycle had been delivered the previous day. It sat in the center of the space, its once perfect form now marred by deep scratches and broken parts. Seeing the damage in the harsh light of the workshop, Bear winced visibly. Looks worse in here. Yes, Keanu agreed. It does. Guard joined them, wiping his hands on a shop rag. We can repair it, but it'll take time. Every Arch is essentially a custom build. How long? Keanu asked. 2 months, maybe more, Guard replied. Some parts will need to be fabricated from scratch. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group as they all contemplated the motorcycle. What had seemed like a justifiable act of rebellion in the heat of the moment now looked petty and destructive. "This is the bike I helped design," Keanu finally said. "The first production model we ever created. It's not just transportation or a status symbol. It represents years of work, trial and error, learning and refining." He looked at each of the bikers in turn. "It matters to me the same way your bikes matter to you. Not because of what they cost, but because of what they mean." Bear nodded slowly, a grudging understanding in his eyes. "I get that. My Harley was my dad's before it was mine. Couldn't put a price on it." "Exactly," Keanu said. "So what now?" Skinner asked. "We've seen your shop. We get that you're serious about motorcycles. What's the point of all this?" Keanu turned to Guard. "You said it would take 2 months to repair my bike?" "At least," Guard confirmed. "What if we had some extra hands?" Keanu asked, looking meaningfully at the 3 bikers. Guard raised his eyebrows. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Keanu replied. "These gentlemen are going to help repair the damage they caused." "The hell we are," Skinner protested. "Actually," Bear cut in, "surprising everyone. I think it's fair." He turned to Keanu. "You could have called the cops. Could have pressed charges for felony vandalism. Instead, you're offering us a chance to make it right." "I don't know the first thing about these fancy bikes," Inc. objected. "You'll learn," Keanu said. "Everyone here started somewhere, and we're just supposed to drive up from Malibu every day?" Skinner asked. "We'll figure something out," Keanu assured him. "The important thing is, are you willing to try?" Another silent exchange passed between the 3 men. Finally, Bear nodded. "Yeah, we're willing." "Good," Keanu extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Bear shook it. "Let's get started." Over the next several days, an unusual routine developed. The 3 bikers arrived each morning at the Arch facility, where they were assigned tasks appropriate to their skill levels. Bear, who had experience working on his own motorcycles, assisted with engine disassembly. Skinner, with steady hands and patience, was put to work on the bodywork repairs. Inc., whose artistic background gave him an eye for detail, helped with refinishing and paint preparation. The Arch team was skeptical at first, keeping a close eye on the newcomers. But as days turned into weeks, boundaries began to blur. The bikers asked questions, learned techniques, showed genuine interest in the craft. In turn, the professional builders recognized the dedication beneath the rough exteriors. Keanu came by regularly, often working alongside them. He never mentioned the initial confrontation or the vandalism. Instead, he treated them like any other members of the team, sharing stories, bringing coffee, offering guidance when needed. One evening, as they were finishing up for the day, Bear approached Keanu in a quiet corner of the workshop. "Why are you doing this?" he asked bluntly. "You could have just moved on, bought another bike." Keanu considered the question. "Because some things are worth fixing, not replacing." Bear nodded, understanding that Keanu wasn't just talking about the motorcycle. "Your old man would be proud," Keanu added. "Seeing you put this much care into something." Bear's expression softened slightly. "Maybe. He was more about tearing things down than building them up. But I'd like to think he'd get it." As they headed for the exit, Bear paused by the partially restored motorcycle. "We'll make it right," he promised, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Better than before," Keanu smiled. "I know you will." 2 months passed more quickly than anyone expected. What had begun as an uncomfortable arrangement born of necessity had evolved into something none of them could have predicted. The 3 bikers had become fixtures at the Arch motorcycle facility, their rough edges softening with each passing day as they immersed themselves in the world of precision engineering and custom craftsmanship. The motorcycle that had once been a target of their misplaced anger was now a shared project, a vessel for unexpected connections. With each repaired component and restored surface, the lines that had once divided them, celebrity and regular folk, wealth and working class, new guard and old, became less defined. On a warm Friday afternoon, they gathered around the completed bike. The restoration was finally finished, and the machine gleamed under the workshop lights, looking even better than before the vandalism. Every scratch had been removed, every broken part replaced with meticulous attention to detail. Bear ran his hand along the fuel tank, admiring the perfect finish. "Hard to believe this is the same bike we tore up." "It's not," Keanu replied. It's better. Guard circled the motorcycle, inspecting it with a critical eye. You boys did good work, he admitted, a note of surprise still evident in his voice despite the weeks of witnessing their dedication. Wouldn't have thought you had it in you when you first walked through the door. Ink beamed at the praise. Of the three, he had undergone the most visible transformation. The angry young man with something to prove had been replaced by someone eager to learn, to create rather than destroy. He had spent countless hours on the paint finish, applying techniques passed down from Arch's master painter. We should take it for a test ride, Skinner suggested. Make sure everything works the way it should. Keanu nodded. That's the plan. But first, he gestured toward a side room. There's something I want to show you. Curious, the three bikers followed him. Inside the room were 3 motorcycles covered with black cloths. With a small smile, Keanu pulled the covers away to reveal 3 gleaming Arch motorcycles, each one slightly different from the others. What's this? Bear asked, confusion evident in his voice. These are from our new custom series, Keanu explained. Prototypes we've been developing. We need experienced riders to test them, give us feedback on performance, handling, comfort on long rides. The 3 men stared at the motorcycles, understanding slowly dawning on their faces. You want us to test them? Ink asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For the next 6 months, Keanu confirmed. You'll need to keep detailed notes, bring them in regularly for adjustments. It's a serious commitment. And you trust us with these? Skinner gestured at the machines, each worth more than most people made in several years. After what we did? Keanu met his gaze steadily. I trust the men you've become these past 2 months, not the men you were when we met. Bear walked slowly around one of the motorcycles, a midnight blue model with custom handlebars that seemed sized for his large frame. Why us? You must know plenty of riders. Because you'll be honest, Keanu said simply. You won't be impressed just because these are expensive or have my name attached to them. You'll judge them on what matters, how they ride, how they feel on the road. The men exchanged glances, a mix of emotions playing across their faces, disbelief, pride, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. There's one condition, Keanu added. Each weekend you'll need to help out with our community program. What community program? Ink asked. We teach basic motorcycle maintenance to kids from tough neighborhoods, Guard explained, joining them in the room. Show them there are ways to channel their energy into something productive. Give them skills they can use for future jobs. Bear nodded slowly. Kids like we used to be. Exactly, Keanu said. The following day, they gathered outside the Arch facility for the test ride. Keanu's restored motorcycle stood alongside the 3 prototypes, all of them gleaming in the California sun. A small crowd of Arch employees had come out to see them off, including mechanics who had worked alongside the bikers during the restoration process. As they prepared to leave, Keanu handed each man a leather jacket with the Arch logo subtly embossed on the back. You're representing the company now, he said. Ride responsibly. Bear accepted the jacket with unexpected reverence. Never thought I'd be wearing a company logo that wasn't forced on me by some minimum wage job. It suits you, Keanu told him. They mounted their bikes, the powerful engines coming to life with a synchronized rumble that vibrated through the pavement. Keanu led the way, guiding them out of the industrial area and toward the open roads that led to the canyons, the perfect testing ground for high-performance motorcycles. As they rode, the city gave way to winding roads and spectacular views. They pushed the bikes hard on straightaways, leaned into curves, tested braking and acceleration. Hours passed as they explored the capabilities of the machines beneath them, stopping occasionally to compare notes or make adjustments. In a scenic overlook high above Los Angeles, they took a break, removing their helmets and looking out over the sprawling city below. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning the distant ocean into a sheet of gold. Never thought I'd say this. Skinner broke the comfortable silence. But these bikes are something else. Nothing like I've ever ridden. Better than your Harley? Keanu asked with a small smile. Different, Skinner replied diplomatically. But yeah, in some ways. The handling is incredible. Bear leaned against his prototype, arms crossed over his chest. You know what gets me? The balance. It's like the bike knows what you want before you do. That's what we aim for, Keanu said. The perfect connection between rider and machine. Ink, who had been quieter than usual, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about something. That first day at Joe's Diner when we saw your bike in our spot. It wasn't really about the parking space, was it? Bear shook his head. No, kid. It wasn't. It was about feeling like we were being pushed out, Skinner added. Like everything was changing and there was no place for us anymore. I understand that feeling, Keanu said. The world changes whether we want it to or not. The trick is finding ways to change with it without losing what matters to you. Bear looked thoughtful. My old man never could do that. Just got angrier as the world moved on without him. He gestured at the motorcycle beneath him. He wouldn't have understood any of this. You don't know that, Keanu replied. People can surprise you. They rode back as the day faded into evening, the lights of Los Angeles beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. The return journey was more relaxed, the 4 riders moving in formation down the highway, a unit now rather than adversaries. At the Arch facility, they parked the bikes and gathered for a final conversation before parting ways. Same time next weekend? Keanu asked. We'll go over your notes, make some adjustments, then take them out again. We'll be here, Bear confirmed, speaking for all of them. And don't forget, Sunday is the first community class, Guard reminded them. 10 kids from the East Side program. Try not to scare them, Ink grinned. We'll be on our best behavior. As they prepared to leave, Bear lingered behind. When the others had moved away, he turned to Keanu. I need to say something, he began awkwardly. What we did to your bike, it was wrong. Not just illegal wrong, but, he searched for the words, morally wrong. We took something important to you and damaged it because we were angry about things that had nothing to do with you. It's in the past, Keanu assured him. Maybe, Bear acknowledged. But I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Keanu nodded, accepting the apology without making Bear dwell on it further. See you next weekend. Count on it, Bear replied, a new certainty in his voice. 6 months later, Joe's Diner in Malibu had 4 motorcycles parked outside, 1 custom Arch KRGT1 and 3 prototype models that had never been seen on public roads before that day. Inside, at a corner table, 4 men shared breakfast and coffee, trading stories and discussing modifications to their bikes with animated gestures. The older waitress watched them with a bemused expression as she refilled their cups. Never thought I'd see the day, she murmured, more to herself than to them. Strangest friendship in Malibu, that's for sure. Keanu smiled up at her. Sometimes the best connections come from unexpected beginnings. Bear raised his coffee cup. To unexpected beginnings. And better endings. They clinked their mugs together, 4 riders united by the road, by their shared passion, and by the understanding that sometimes destruction could lead to creation, if you were willing to do the work of rebuilding. Outside, their motorcycles gleamed in the morning sun, machines that represented not just transportation but transformation, of metal and mechanics, certainly, but more importantly, of the men who rode them,